Welcome to Behind the Plan, the road to retirement, where we take you behind the scenes of real financial planning moments that matter. Today's story is about a woman who is navigating divorce after 17 years of marriage, and how one of our advisors helped her uncover hidden assets, protect her financial future, and find clarity during a very difficult time. So, joining us is Christine. Christine, good to see you back.
Thank you.
So let's set the stage. What was this client's situation when she first came to you?
So she was in the process of going through a divorce. They'd been married quite a long time. And initially, I think they were contemplating not using an attorney or any professional help, which sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. But she did have some concerns that maybe some assets were being hidden. She was not the primary financial person in the relationship. The husband took over most of the finances. So she wanted to get a really good understanding of where she was at with things, just navigating the divorce, and then also budgeting post divorce.
Yeah, and it sounds like I think the quote that you used when we were talking about this beforehand was she said something along the lines of, I don't even know what I don't know, which is probably a really common scenario when you're not overseeing the financial assets. So your
Yeah.
job is obviously to go in and try to make some sense of this. Obviously, you don't want to make any assumptions on what was happening, but really just kind of get to the facts. A very common and vulnerable place to be for her, I'm sure. Emotional too. What were some of the first red flags that you spotted, though, in sort of the financial arrangement that she had with her soon-to-be divorced husband?
Sure. So while some things may seem nefarious, they aren't always necessarily that way, but we did, after reviewing some things like W-2s, tax returns, pay stubs, et cetera, we did see that there was actually a bank account that had been opened without her knowledge. He was taking the direct deposit. I think this happened probably around the time of maybe a raise or a promotion. And part of his direct deposit was going to a completely different account. So she didn't even know it was happening. She was just used to seeing the paycheck coming into the joint account. And then when some things changed with his benefits, that increase was going to an individual account that she did not know about and was not initially disclosed. So that was obviously a very big red flag.
Yeah.
There were some other things that I don't necessarily think were malicious in any way, but some assets that were being potentially not disclosed right up front, some ATVs, jewelry, guns, like those tangible assets that maybe aren't tracked as much. And
Mhm.
then there were some loans given to, well, there's lump sums given to some family members to repay a loan, whether or not there had been a loan was being called into question, or were assets also being hidden in that way.
Yeah, so you have the emotional weight of the divorce. So, broken hearts are prevailing. And now you have money and potentially money that was not necessarily totally transparent of where it was coming from or where it was going to or how it was being spent. What was her response when to all this when she when you uncovered it all, and was she ready to fight, or what was her sort of mental state there?
So she was pretty upset, obviously, when we uncovered some things. And obviously, parts were clear what had happened, parts were not clear. We always try to just say, hey, we don't know what the intention was, what the scenario was. Sometimes people just forget things had happened. Maybe he was just being generous, giving a gift to his parents. Does not necessarily mean he was hiding assets. So we tried to understand the emotional aspect of it. It is very heavy and it's already hard to go through a divorce, even if you were the one who wanted it. You're still mourning the loss of a relationship. So,
Right.
and also, money can make people weird. So
Hmm.
we know that maybe you start out and it's amicable when you're going to split assets, but then tempers happen. You have outside influences. So people can
Right.
get really frustrated that way. So it was really emotional for her to also find out that some of the finances maybe were not as she expected.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so now she has to advocate for herself with you at her side. So there was something else about an inheritance too, right? Something there was a an uncovered inheritance.
There was an inheritance that she had received from her parents. Now, typically, and it does depend on what state you're in, but an inheritance is typically not considered marital property. But if you title it in joint name later, it can be then considered marital property. And when we were reviewing everything, this inheritance was in joint name and she did not think it was supposed to be that way.
Mm.
So that also brought up some weird feelings. Like, well, I remembered some meetings with our past advisor, and I don't really remember signing off on this, but I guess I did. So there was confusion there on what happened and what her intention was. She was happy to use the inheritance to support the marriage, but ultimately she wanted it to go to the kids.
Mm.
So that was also tricky to navigate because we don't know what his intention was. And also it's just a good thing for people to be aware of when you're settling out your assets, not even just in a divorce situation, but just where do you want things to ultimately go and how important it is to title things from an estate planning perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of the steps that you took. Obviously, if they were proactive about this, it would be a much easier endeavor. But now you have to start mapping everything out. What were those steps like, and how did you get, from kind of confusion to clarity in that regard?
Sure. So first off, it's a lot of paperwork that needs to be gathered, tons of different statements, credit card statements, investment account statements.
Hmm.
And sometimes it can go back really far. So there's a lot of that initial homework to get all those documents. And I really think it helps when you're working with someone to help you just find the documents and identify things. And then you kind of have this like forensic accounting piece where we're going through and trying to track where things went and why and when did
Mm.
things occur. When were assets received? When did you have this house? When did this pension start, et cetera? So then it can actually be factored in what is marital property and what is separate. So it is a bit of a Easter egg hunt in the beginning to go through some of these things, but it does really help the process so everybody can understand where things are because I think a lot of it is just a matter of people or just, the average person doesn't understand these finances. So evaluation of things, what the taxable, pre-tax, post-tax implications are on property, on investments, retirement accounts, like these are all really important things to factor in.
Yeah, not to mention 17 years of sharing assets, and 17 years is a long time. There's a lot that happens in those in a 17-year time period. So a lot of
Mhm.
assets can exchange hands and be accumulated and put away, and like you said, even easily forgotten about, even if it wasn't, done intentionally. So was there a moment when you saw her mind shift or her mindset shift?
There was. So initially in the process, the husband had filed and, they were starting to talk about just an amicable split. Like, we could do this. Here's a spreadsheet, half and half, we're good. She did have reservations about it, but then
Mm.
just being able to do just a lot of education to help her feel, empowered because she didn't really handle the finances before. He just took it over. So after really going through things, showing her everything, talking about the tax implications, understanding what each person wanted and how to split it equitably, I think really helped. And then once we got through the end, the proposed settlement was different than what he was initially proposing. And I think one thing that can be scary is people sometimes just want to throw their hands up and say, just give them whatever, I want to be done. But
Mhm.
they regret that later. So, as painful as it is and can take a little time, at the end of it, she felt just a lot of peace of mind because she felt, for one, it was fair, and two, that she was educated and she felt better going forward because she knew what everything was, like where it was and what it meant, and she felt more empowered to move forward.
Yeah, I was just going to use that word. Going from powerless to feeling empowered is probably really gratifying at many levels. And, so I guess the main takeaway here, as I'm listening to you, is something along the lines of, don't just go through the motions. Know that you have the potential to um, find an advocate, someone who understands the rules and the laws and, the impact of moving money across the states and across different names and the tax implications that related to that. How would you summarize that takeaway? What's the biggest takeaway for anyone that's listening or watching who might be in a similar situation?
Yeah, so I mean, as a certified divorce financial analyst, on top of being a planner and advisor, our whole goal is to make sure things are equitable. We're not trying to take someone to the cleaners. We're not trying to stir the pot. We're just here to help your attorney and you and your other partner understand what the financial implications are of all these assets and how they're split, and to make sure that we're really just crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's. You know, I have a whole checklist I'll run through with people to make sure these are things we want to wrap up, to make sure that it feels good and that you're moving forward. And really, I always say if I can just provide that peace of mind, that's what I'm after. And while divorce is, you know, nobody's happy to get divorced typically. You got married for a reason. I think another important thing about the designation is that it also just helps with couples that are in a relationship or starting a new marriage. Because as I mentioned before, like the estate planning portion, where assets should go, how things should be titled, this is just very important. So it's been really enlightening because it's helped me with couples that are in a great relationship and happy, but also to talk about, you know, these different aspects and what they need going forward.
That's amazing. And it's clearly this is why we do what we do. Thank you very much for walking us through all this.
Yeah, thank you.